I think this was before I got into quarantine, I did have a major breakdown and I had met with a biblical counselor. I really did open up a lot about things I'd experienced, my depression, my sexuality, how I was treated. And I risked a lot doing that. After this person, like they heard my story of all these different things, they told me that I was paying for my sin.
Welcome back to Prey versus Predator. Today, we are so happy to have Andrew back again for his third episode with us. You might remember that when episode number 2 with Andrew finished, it was COVID. And he has been regaling us with stories of his time at Bob Jones University. And maybe before we dig in, Andrew, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself if they have perhaps not listened to our first 2 episodes.
Of course, yeah. So I'm Andrew Pledger, and I'm a queer survivor of the independent fundamental Baptist movement. This group is known for its strict rules, its emphasis on the King James only version of the Bible, and just really known for their extreme take on just regular Baptist theology and just the separation from society and the commitment that's expected for their members. I was raised in this and I was homeschooled K through 12. And then after graduation, I ended up at Bob Jones University and experienced a lot at that university for 3.5 years and was expelled. And since my expulsion, I've been speaking up about my experiences in fundamentalism online and also through podcasting. And I have a podcast out now called Surviving Bob Jones University of Christian Cults, a limited podcast. And all the episodes are out for people to hear in depth about Bob Jones University.
That's great. Thank you for reminding people who you are. And if you haven't listened to the first 2 episodes, I would recommend to go do that because we're going to pick up with Andrew's story. COVID has hit.
Now what?
Yes. Yeah. So I remember when COVID happened and I was wondering like, oh my gosh, like hearing about it, if the school was going to shut down. So I think it was early 2020 when the school shut down. We all, long story short, just changed to online school to finish out that semester. So I had to go back home. The independent fundamental Baptist church I grew up in, shockingly, it shut down for, I think, just a few weeks. And, that summer or that break really between the end of that semester and then, the fall semester, those several months were really hard for me because I was cut off from that support that I had before in Greenville, that family that I had met. Mm-hmm. So we were all separated. And I'm, in this unaffirming environment with my parents. And, and there were still a lot of things from my past traumas that I didn't know that I was experiencing, but they were manifesting itself through my mental health. And I fell into a deep depression that summer and thankfully was able to get on medication, which, was just unheard of in my family, but I was able to thankfully get on that. And it did help keep me above water once I found the right medication. But I got a medication and I remember Bob Jones that fall. So the fall, I guess that was 2020. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fall of 2020. That was my junior year. So I was going back, still struggling with depression, on medication and not telling anyone I was on medication because you do not get on medication for mental health and fundamentalism. That's a sign of you're not trusting, you don't have faith. Jesus or God is a solution to your mental health problems and you don't get on medication. It was seen as just weakness and a lack of faith. So I didn't tell anyone that I was on medication or really on antidepressants for my depression.
Your family did not know this at all. They did not know, they didn't support you getting on medication or?
Yeah, I mean, it was really hard to get on medication. I basically had to manipulate them so I can get on medication. I basically said I'm dropping out of Bob Jones. I'm quitting my job if you do not let me get on medication. Like I was just going to drop out of life if they didn't do that.
You had to ask your parents' permission to get on medication or to go see a doctor, or how does that work?
I feel like I mean, I really like, at that point, I guess I didn't feel like I could do it on my own. And like, I had my insurance through them. So any kind of charges,
Okay, so they would
about
see.
that. It would
Okay.
always come back to them. Maybe they might not see what it was exactly, but they would somehow find out. So I did. I'm like, I really like, I want to go to the doctor and get on antidepressants. And it is something so this was I think, let's see. So that I was 20 years old at this point. And around, several years earlier before that, I had tried to get on antidepressants when I struggled in my teen years with depression, but my mom was just so scared of that and did not want that. But here I am again, several years later, experiencing an episode, and I remember the past, how they felt about medication, and they offered spiritual solutions that just didn't work for me. And so, I had to manipulate for them to be okay with that, at least. And like, I guess looking back, it's like I see why you would ask the question of if I couldn't do that on my own. And it's like in that environment, like you're under the authority of your parents, even though technically, I was 20 years old, I still felt like a child. Yeah.
Did they know at this point that you were gay as well, your family? Or was you in the closet with
my
them?
My mom knew, but I feel like
you mentioned that.
She just has this way of just blocking out all memories she doesn't like at all and just forgets they even happen. So I did tell her before I went to Bob Jones, but I right now, like I recently had a conversation with my mother, and like after that, I'm like, okay, I bet she's blocked out so much to create this perfect idyllic reality she wants to believe. So anyways, I did tell her, but honestly, I think she's blocked it out of her memory. I don't know if she even remembers at all. But everyone else in my family, no, I had not told anyone at all.
So at this time, so it's COVID, you're going into a depression, you get on medication, you're in the closet, sort of. And then what happens?
I thankfully was able to like function through work that summer. And I signed up I'd already signed up my semester for Bob Jones. So I head back to Bob Jones. It was that August of 2020. And, I was still struggling with depression. And I just remember going back, and I think I did a very light load that semester because I was struggling so much. I think I only did like 12 credits of classes that semester because I'm like, I am struggling. I don't know, like if I can get through this. So I just gave myself a lighter load. And I just remember just all the emails that I got before the semester started of all the protocols that were going to happen to try to mitigate the spread of COVID, to make it work in person, like going to college, being in a dormitory, being around all these people, how we were going to make it work. And they had this system, long story short, where we would have this app we would log into every day to check our symptoms. If we had symptoms, we would have to go get tested. And while we were waiting for the test results, get back to isolate. And when it came to socializing, they would try to spread us out more. And, I remember we all, like over probably 2,500 students packed into this massive auditorium, sitting every other seat, which is probably like 2 feet.
Yeah.
And we all have our mask on. And I'm like, okay, like we're all packed in this tin can. We're sitting probably 2 feet apart. We're still breathing through all this stuff. And I'm like, this is not and then, we're in these seminars all together talking about how to deal with COVID. And I'm like, whatever. Okay.
What was the general treatment of those protocols? Was it kind of like they thought, okay, roll their eyes, like we got to do this? Or did they take it seriously? Because I know that there can be some sort of relief system around that.
They took it seriously.
Okay.
They wanted to take it seriously. There were things they did. I was like, okay, this wasn't smart to do. But anyways, they were serious about it because they knew they did not want to shut the university down again, because I think they're afraid of like students not coming back.
Right.
And I think they're afraid that COVID was going to be like the end of the university. I think they were so afraid. So they were trying to keep as many students there as possible. And they also knew that they had limited space to keep students in quarantine if they got sick, because if you got sick, they had a whole dormitory that was used just for quarantine. And because they had, lower enrollment, they could use that. But like, it had a limited space, probably a couple hundred people could be sick, but not like above that, maybe less than that. But, and then, the school used to have a hospital, but the hospital had been closed for like a decade, probably by the time I got there. It was just a building sitting there. So, they couldn't open up their hospital because it was just a wreck. So there was this dormitory. So there was always this fear of sending people home, if they got to the point where they couldn't have people in the quarantine dorm. And I remember the protocols of like, just even in the dining common, we had to like spread out also. And in classes, they tried to spread us out if we could. They always had hand sanitizer available. And, we were in the midst of it. None of us really knew how to deal with any of this. Like it was just, we were all learning as we went along. And, and that was honestly all those protocols and things, like they were really hard on my mental health and a lot of people's mental health, I think too, because you're in an environment where you're already hyper vigilant and so worried about breaking the rules. But here you have this other level of being hyper vigilant of just everything you do to not get anyone sick. And I think, for me, I think it was kind of in the middle of that semester. I feel like it was like October that I started getting symptoms, and and that was a struggle. And like the frustrating thing, there were no tests available on campus at all. You had to go to the hospital nearby. And long story short, I ended up having COVID, and I have to go to this dormitory for quarantine. And honestly, like it was really eye-opening to be put in quarantine because it slowed down the daily life at Bob Jones University, because, every day we're going into our classes. We had to go to chapel about every day. We have our discipleship groups several nights a week. We have to attend church twice a week. We have to be, involved in our society's weekly meetings. So there were all these different activities that were going on. But once you were in quarantine, you weren't required to do any of that. You were in quarantine, I think at least like 10 days, I think. And I just remember just the change that happened when everything slowed down and I didn't have to partake in all these different daily activities of things that we did. And I think before I had gotten in quarantine, I think this was before I got into quarantine, I did have a major breakdown, and I had met with a quote biblical counselor or whatever, but I think they were technically my dorm supervisor. And I really did open up a lot about things I'd experienced, my depression, my sexuality, how I was treated. Wow. And I risked a lot doing that.
Yeah.
And after this person, like they heard my story of all these different things, they told me that I was paying for my sin. And they basically like blaming me. And after that meeting, that person said they couldn't meet with me anymore because they didn't think I was a Christian. And like biblical counselors or people who are counseling in that, like you're not supposed to meet with someone if they don't claim to be a believer.
Oh, wow.
And so, but anyways, it was strange because, he met with me before I went to quarantine. We were distanced, and he's like, okay, I have this book for you. You can read when you're in quarantine. And it was basically just a book of a person who claimed to be an ex-gay and was healed from homosexuality. That was their terminology around that. And anyways, I did end up reading it in quarantine.
How was it?
I don't know the title of the book. I wish I did.
Oh, I was just asking, how was it? Was it a bad book? Like, was it an interesting book? Or I guess it didn't change your mind.
I mean, I ended up later like shredding the book or cutting it up. Like,
yeah.
That's how I felt about it.
Yeah, good.
That was very healing for me.
Totally.
But I mean, from what I remember from that book, it was basically this guy talking about how, I mean, they see it as an addiction, really. And, he did struggle a lot with sexual behavior. And for me, like, it's something that's common in fundamentalism, whether you're gay or not. There's such a struggle with sexual desires and navigating that and experiencing hypersexuality, I think. And I think it's just a repression with it. You're so repressed, and it will come out in so many different unhealthy ways. And like, oh my gosh. And one of the things that Bob Jones, I forgot about this, but there's this program called Covenant Eyes.
Oh yeah, I know that.
It's in the media right now.
It is.
Yeah.
It reminded me of it with Mike Johnson and his son. Oh my God, it's so creepy. But it was interesting because Bob Jones' internet was always like, there were filters, there were monitors, like their systems would be alerted if you search something bad, and they could see whatever your internet history. So they were seeing what we're doing anyways, but you could go a further step and sign up for this Covenant Eyes program. And there were instructions on I think it was every single bulletin board on every dorm floor. There were instructions on how to download Covenant Eyes, and you could have an accountability partner if you, whatever, struggle with pornography or wanted someone to, like, in their words, hold you accountable for your internet browsing. So that was, I think, an example of just like this struggle they saw with like just sexuality. Like they wanted, like, you couldn't trust yourself around it at all. You couldn't have, it wasn't possible for guys to have self-control around sexual desires. And I think this bleeds over into the teachings of how women are blamed for how they're dressed in that environment. And a lot of women, at Bob Jones, I can't remember did I talk about the Grace Report?
You did mention it, yes, but you could probably remind our listeners.
Yeah, so the Grace Report was a report of an investigation by an organization called Grace, which stands for Godly Response to Abuse in the Christian Environment. And there were so many things in this report of like issues around Bob Jones handling sexual abuse claims. That one of the things was these biblical counselors were like asking women what they're wearing, and they were blaming women for what they wore. So it's just in this environment, men cannot control their sexual desires, and women have to be, what's the word? Like, women are seen as a stumbling block to men, and they're held accountable for their actions or blamed for men's actions. And in that kind of environment, like that's where abuse will thrive. And so kind of back to this idea of like, you cannot trust yourself when it comes to sexuality, and there's no healthy sexual release to that. So I think, the guy in this book, he did struggle with it. And I think a lot of it too has to do with the shame that's put on you around it. I think that can cause that cycle. I'm not an expert on the area, but that's just something I've just kind of, I don't know, thought of the shame that comes with that. But yeah, I read that book, and the guy ended up in the end still having same-sex desires, but he had a wife and a family, so he was happy apparently. But like, he still had that internal drive. So to me, like, that wasn't change, I think, at all. And so, yeah, I just, anyways, after I read the book, I was like, oh my gosh, I did keep it for a little while because I didn't want to shred it immediately because I'm like, oh, he's going to want to eventually talk about it. But anyway, so that semester, I think, like, I'm not sure how long. I felt like it was at the end of the semester, the depression was kind of lifting. And then the second semester, junior year, that was when like I had a reconversion experience, I guess. And I was really emotionally manipulative. Looking back, like, I was emotionally manipulated. And because there were moments where you were overwhelmed with love, and there were moments where you're overwhelmed with so much shame and blame in these sermons, you would like, it would be like a pendulum swing between those two things. And, when you were really down and feeling awful, there were just moments where you were like lifted up, and it was just so intoxicating in a sense, or like it's an emotional high you would get. And like, I was in a very vulnerable place, feeling so lonely, feeling so isolated, struggling with depression, just needing just community and just love. And there was just this sermon where like, it was all love. There was no catch. at all. And it was really like out of place for Bob Jones University, and just overwhelmed, like the feelings and emotions from that, just being completely loved unconditionally was just so overwhelming. And so like experienced what I thought in that moment was like, believing again or accepting their gospel message and having the Holy Spirit implanted in like my body or whatever. But yeah, after that, like the high went down after a day. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that was not a spiritual experience. That was emotional manipulation. And I had gotten saved several times throughout all my childhood just to make sure I wasn't going to hell. But like, it was not until this time that I was like, oh my gosh, like this is really emotional manipulation. And, before I had realized this, I already texted this guy, oh, I got saved or blah, blah. So he was like, oh, I want to meet. So I go into this meeting knowing that this is BS. This isn't going to change anything. I'm not going to suddenly be able to read the Bible and then be healed emotionally. So I just didn't tell him that I thought it was emotional manipulation. I made him think that I had this real reconversion or whatever experience. So he would continue to meet with me, because what he wanted to do from then on, he was like, let's not worry about your sexuality. Let's just do discipleship. So it just was a discipleship type thing, just one-on-one, with him really like teaching me the Bob Jones approach to theology. And he would just be like cherry picking around scripture to paint this theology of Bob Jones University. And I was kind of surprised by it at first, because there wasn't the blame and shame in the beginning, at least, that I was so used to in this environment and in fundamentalism. Like it sounded kind of nice at first. And, I told him about my negative experiences in religion, of how like I was just constantly feeling the burden of having to be perfect and constantly having to follow all of these rules, like really my whole life. And I'm like, I didn't understand. I'm like, we're free, supposedly, but it doesn't feel like freedom at all. And then, that's just what I told him. And he told me, it's like, oh, well, that's not how it is. And, I didn't say this to him, but I'm like, Bob Jones isn't like this. Like at Bob Jones, you have to meet all these certain standards to be seen as saved or right with God. It's anyway. So yeah, it's very like, they wouldn't say that it's human centered, but like it very much is based on works. They would deny that, but it is very much based on works in that environment. And this discipleship turned into eventually conversion therapy. Like that's what he wanted to turn it into. And he did tell me that, but at that time, I thought it was a choice. I thought it was something I was choosing to do. But looking back, just the amount of power I think that he had, him being the leader, me being the follower, kind of in this one-on-one relationship, I don't think I felt the autonomy to say no in the beginning. I eventually did cut things off with him. And really what changed things was when it switched to conversion therapy, and it was after the first session of conversion therapy, I remember like, I don't remember anything that happened in that room. Like my mind just like left my body. Like it was just, I don't remember anything that happened. And all I remember was leaving the room and just feeling like the shame, the anxiety of like, oh, like I am unacceptable until I change my sexuality. Like God will never accept me or love me until I change my sexuality. And I felt the suicidal feelings coming back. And, my intuition was just very strong in this moment. It was like, you don't need to do that again. So I thankfully was able to text this person and be like, I don't want to meet anymore. I don't think this is healthy. I'm not participating in this anymore. And then he was like, he texted, let's talk about this. I want to meet and talk about this. And I texted him like, there's nothing to talk about. Like I've made my decision. I don't want to do this anymore. And so, yeah, after that, he did leave me alone. And I avoided him like the plague anywhere. And it was hard because he was my dorm supervisor. So he would be at the front desk a lot. So I would learn to just take the side doors and just not be around. And it was, I think that was like, for me, like remembering him blaming me for everything that had happened to me. And then after that session, that was when like my final like decision of like, I'm deconverting from like at least fundamentalist Christianity. And after that semester, I was just like, I'm questioning this entire system, the whole authority of all of it that we're not allowed to question. And it came to like questioning like the King James Bible, which I was brought up in, their literal interpretation approach. And I was like, okay, we're not allowed to question, but if their approach to this is foolproof, like why are we not allowed to question? Why aren't we allowed to critically think? Like, isn't faith and spirituality supposed to be about exploration, not just following a set of rules and commands that these leaders tell us to do? So for me, it was like, I don't want to believe any of this. And I want to get rid of it as quickly as possible because just the trauma from it, the pain that it caused, and the idea of God that I grew up with, which is what I experienced of it was very abusive. This God that switched between love and abuse, at the swing of anything. And during that summer, like it was mentally exhausting to do that. And I did that after it was end of my junior year. And I did that summer before my last year at Bob Jones.
So you ended up,
wait if you want to ask
so you ended up not graduating from Bob Jones.
And I did not end up graduating from Bob Jones. I did go there my senior year. I went back to Bob Jones University, not identifying with their belief system at all anymore. And like just the cognitive dissonance was too much. And like I felt so disillusioned walking on campus, not believing these things anymore, not sometimes saying, oh, I do. And then, oh, I don't know. Like I made a firm decision finally, and really battling a lot of indoctrination and really mind control I've been subjected to, because like there were several things that like kept me coming back to it. And one of the things was like, missing out on the will of God. Like you could, if you were in this group and, you followed everything, like you could discover the will of God, the amazing plan for your life. And, if you left the system, you wouldn't have God's will for your life, and you would live a miserable and happy life. Like you would never be happy outside of the belief system. And terrible things would happen to you if you did not follow these beliefs.
It does remind me of the Duggar documentary where they talked about if I went against my parents, something bad. I think I mentioned this before, something bad will happen. And that idea of magical thinking, because I do know even in my history, like the will of God was kind of this thing that you had to seek out and you had to find, but it usually involved what they deemed, the authorities in that system, what the will of God is for you.
And it was so hard to find. It was like on the head of a needle.
Yeah, is that what they would describe, the metaphor? Okay.
And if you move just a little bit, you're not going to find it.
And it never had anything to do with what I wanted to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what I thought was the idea of what feels good to you? What is your interest?
What are you passionate about?
What are you passionate about? Never was a consideration, in these institutions or these institutions of control. I think it's about what we deem as appropriate. And it is interesting because if you wanted to be a pastor or a leader of a big congregation, you were passionate about, that's okay. You could be passionate about that, except if you're a woman or possibly a gay man. It is interesting because that was always used as a carrot about the will of God, which sounds so great, but it takes away all of our own autonomy to go towards the things
and our own free will.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, it most definitely does.
Your time at Bob Jones cut short. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I went back my senior year, really still questioning a lot of things, not telling anyone about any of this. I had told my mom over the summer that, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said this. But anyways, I was questioning and probably going to leave that environment. And like, she was so upset. And, it really showed her indoctrination because she told me that, oh no, she's like, if you leave, she reinforced those beliefs. she told me you're going to end up homeless. You're going to be a drug addict. Terrible things are going to happen to you. And she believed that because that's what the independent fundamental Baptist movement taught. And even like just fundamentalism in general, like you were going under the hedge of protection. And she was so upset and just tried to manipulate me back into that. But I was like, I'm so miserable. And I didn't dig into the specifics with her, but I was like, I can't. But I'm like, I'm going back to Bob Jones and I'm finishing, but I'm done with all of this. Like it's been forced on me my whole life. And, you know, after that conversation, you know, we never talked about it again. I went back to the school questioning and I decided for my internship, my photography internship at the school. I was doing it for the art department there. I basically ran social media, oversaw the photo studio, and worked on my own personal project that I wanted to do. I decided to create a project that portrayed like my experience of religious trauma. And it was this series that portrayed this person that was trapped in a room, and all they had in the room was a Bible and then a cross on the wall. And like, you know, this person discovers the different things in their room when they're struggling, and it shows them struggling with mental health, and they're going to religion to solve these problems, but they're getting worse and worse. And eventually, like during the series, the person doesn't know this, but they have a key around their neck, and they learn, you know, through a book, they find that this key can unlock the door that they're trapped in. So the key kind of, I guess, represented free will or autonomy, that they didn't know that they had the choice eventually in that hard situation. So the person, they put the key in the keyhole in the end and leave that environment. And that was me, kind of like this story of like suffering in silence, struggling mentally, doing all the things I was told to do, and like dealing with anxiety, severe depression, and being suicidal. Not knowing who I am at all, not having a sense of identity, not being able to trust myself, just feeling so cut off. And, you know, in the end, eventually it was very difficult, but this person, you know, puts the key in the keyhole and leaves that environment. And that to me, like, you know, and I spent probably around like 60 hours just through the whole process of this entire project. It was just very cathartic. Released a lot of just pent up emotions that were just inside me. And that was my first semester of senior year. That was the fall of 2021. And I decided to publicly tell my story. Because and I think what I've forgotten to say at this time, I had been working, originally, it was just me writing my experiences. And it turned into what will eventually be my memoir. I had written out like just thousands of words just of my story. Like I think at that time it was around like 45,000 words of me just typing out all these experiences throughout my life. It's at 60,000 now. But
wow.
But I had like chronologically like gone through a lot of things in my mind, and then just. And that's the thing, like so many things in this environment, they're normalized. You don't like think about it. And then you like research about like, what does a healthy family look like? What are healthy relationships like? What is religious trauma? What is religious abuse? All these different things I was researching, and it was just like kind of like opened my eyes that I had normalized so much of my upbringing. And looking back, I can see my struggles with it, but, you were blamed if you struggled. It was on you. It was never the system. It was on you. So, I decided at that point, at least what I had processed of my life and my story, to tell it publicly and come out of the closet and publicly leave fundamentalism and talk about my struggles with mental health that I had throughout my life because of that. And I did this interview with, he interviewed me on his Instagram Live. His name is Josh Harris. Yeah. And he wrote the book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, very influential in evangelicalism with purity culture. And he had publicly deconverted and was basically trying to offer a space to help people who were deconstructing and healing from toxic religion. And he interviewed me, and, I publicly did all those things. And as a risk I was willing to take, like my intuition was really strong in that decision. Cause like I thought back and forth about it for several weeks, whether to back out or not. But like my intuition was like, it felt like it was a right thing to do, even though logically it didn't look like the right decision. And so when I did that interview, I was expelled from Bob Jones University.
Oh.
Yep.
So this was the interview that really expelled you.
So it wasn't your social media posts.
It was not. No, it was an interview. And this interview, it was the very beginning of my second semester at Bob Jones. I only did two weeks, I think, of my first semester, our second semester of senior year at BJU. And then, it was probably around like 10 days after the interview, I got called like at a strange time in my dorm down to meet with several people. And one of those people was that discipleship guy that I met with her. So that was hard.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it was what you said in the interview, or was it because of Josh Harris being such a polarizing figure?
I think it was a mix of both, but like what they told me was, because you don't believe what we believe anymore, we cannot have you at this university. And they never brought up my sexuality once during that meeting.
Well, because they couldn't really. I don't know if legally
they couldn't. And like they had in the past for other people, and like a lot of issues with that. So they've learned to just get around that. And another way they get around it is they ask you to withdraw. So they were technically kicking me out, but like we're asking you to withdraw. Here's all the forms, do it, sign it, be out by whatever.
Did you go back home to your parents?
Yeah. So what happened was the family that I had met in Greenville, they saw the interview before all this happened, and they were like, oh my gosh. So like, you're definitely going to get kicked out. Just to let you know, like if you're ever kicked out, you can come here. Like you don't have to be in fundamentalism anymore and be in this environment. So before that meeting, I called them and I'm like, I'm probably about to get kicked out of Bob Jones. And they're like, all right, we'll prepare the room right now. We'll go do that. So I was kicked out, and Bob Jones didn't even tell my parents at all.
Oh, interesting.
Wow.
And they usually call the parents beforehand and tell them, but not with me. And it was because, my parents were a little iffy about Bob Jones, about some of the things and approaches that they did with, like, especially the King James Version of the Bible, how they did not take that stance. So Bob Jones had me call my parents, and that was a tough conversation. I was honestly expecting to like be shunned because like, our family, we had shunned a family member in the past who came out and left that environment. And then, that family member never came back. But my parents were shockingly worried about me cutting them off. And, they were like, do you want a relationship? And I'm like, okay. I'm like, if I'll listen to boundaries, we can try to make it work. And like, it's been a rough 2 years since then of making that work. Definitely. And it's something like I'm still struggling and wondering like how to navigate going forward, or if I want to do that anymore at all.
Yeah.
But anyways, after that phone call, in that phone call, I told them I'm not coming back. I'm moving in with this family in Greenville, and they had met that family before too. They didn't know exactly where I had met them, but my parents had met them once while they were visiting Bob Jones. And, they kind of knew who they were. And so anyway, so I told them I'm not coming back. And after that, like I lost a lot of friends. I was fired from my jobs. I lost a lot of career connections. Like I was starting over. Like it was actually like my life to build for the first time.
Welcome to your life, Andrew.
Thank you so much.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we have a lot of questions. We're going to do another episode with you, and get ready. Get ready for all the questions. Thank you for sharing so much of yourself with us. So we're going to take a breather, and we're going to have our audience take a breather, and then we're going to come back for our next episode.
All right. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.